Good evening, ladies. I'm very honored to be invited by the N'shei Chabad to give a brief presentation on my relationship with the Rebbe. And tonight is the eve of Rosh Chodesh Kislev, a holiday for us in the sense that 33 years ago we were very jubilantly allowing the Rebbe to return home to his wife Rebbetzin Schneerson after confinement at 770 following his acute illness for which I was called in at the time of Shmini Atzeres Simchas Torah that year. We remember the joy we had was a multiple victory, a victory on many levels, because for one thing we were very, very victorious, we felt, as physicians, for guiding the Rebbe through a very severe medical crisis, the likes of which we really couldn't make public at that time. And the Rebbe himself was very appreciative because he too recognized through his symptoms and through the items that we showed him and educated him about, he was very aware of the danger that he was in at the time, and the confinement was, of course, growing and growing and growing in duration, and being released on Rosh Chodesh Kislev was a wonderful break for him. For the Rebbetzin, it was also a wonderful reunion with her husband, whom she met with daily, but whom she really didn't have private time to talk with him, which was a very special thing to the Rebbe. I've told many times before how important that private time was to the Rebbe. In fact, he has told me on many occasions, and I've mentioned this in public discourses, that his meeting with his wife on a daily basis to have tea with her was on par with his putting on tefillin in his mind of his daily obligations. And he was very close with Rebbetzin Schneerson. So this was a part of a victory. And the other victory was that for the Hasidim, they had a chance to see the Rebbe come out of 770, not be confined and hidden away in the shell of doctors and well-meaning executive secretaries and the like who were seeing him and not really bringing him out to the public. The only exposure he had had to the public primarily was his giving a radio broadcast at the Shabbos Mevorchim right after he was sick. There was Shabbos Mevorchim after Shmini Atzeres Simchas Torah, and he wanted to be on the air, so we let him broadcast from his room. But outside of that, he had really no personal contact or public contact with the Hasidim till Rosh Chodesh Kislev. I'll mention that for the Rebbe to have escaped our confinement and coming home, it was also a chance for us to see how he was doing really after all the intensive medical watching, because when you're under the kind of surveillance we gave the Rebbe, there really wasn't a moment of privacy. There wasn't any chance taken about irregular heart rhythms and all these things that we watch when we are confining a patient and watching the rhythm. And now the Rebbe was on his own, so he had a chance to sort of leave the nest, in a sense, and fly on his own. This led to a little problem that came up when Yutes Kislev came shortly thereafter, because we decided with the Rebbe's permission to let him attend a Farbrengen, and he was very, very anxious to be in the public eye at that point. He felt well enough to do this, and we as doctors were optimistic about his progress, and we had wired the Rebbe with monitoring equipment that permitted us to see what was going on while he was giving the Farbrengen. So under his kapota was a set of telemonitors, which for that time was a very new piece of equipment that we got from the NASA space program. It was really not something available in a normal hospital setting. And there I was coming to my very first Farbrengen, Yutes Kislev, and I sat amongst the crowd. It was a very impressive convocation. Probably 3,000 people were in the room. But instead of sitting at the table, I had my head buried down below the table to see the telemonitors that no one knew were being recorded as the Rebbe spoke. And I've mentioned before that as the Rebbe gave the Farbrengen, to my surprise, there was a lot of irregular heart rhythm, much more than we had ever seen before in all the weeks of his confinement at 770. So we had no anticipation of all this irregular heart rhythm, and we recognized its danger. And there I was with my colleague of blessed memory, Dr. Larry Resnick, and both of us were just panic-stricken when we looked down at the monitor, and no one knew that we were having trouble with this. We just simply were watching this very irregular rhythm, and the Rebbe was giving a sicha, and we didn't know what to do, whether to interrupt the sicha and make a whole parade up there on the stage, take the Rebbe off and protect him, or let him continue at some great danger of having a breakdown in heart rhythm. But we thought that for the whole picture of things, we would let him go through with the sicha, and then when he'd be all through, maybe it would get better. And that's what happened. The sicha was over, and to our relief, the rhythm got better. But then the next sicha had the same repeat performance. So there again, In the middle of the Yud Tes Kislev Farbrengen was another parade of irregular heart rhythm, and we were again panic-stricken. We didn't know what to do. I had given the Rebbe some hand signals that his pulse was irregular, but the Rebbe gave me a little signal back that everything was under control, and he didn't perceive these. But it wasn't until he gave a mimer, when during the mimer he was in a state of mind that overrode the irregular heart rhythm, and his rhythm was very, very smooth and regular. And then we were so relieved that we seemed to have been out of the woods. Naturally, we as doctors couldn't have anticipated this properly. We were a little bit over-optimistic, so we went ahead and had the Rebbe put himself at this danger. But it taught us an important lesson. We recognized that with a heart attack of the nature the Rebbe had, that he couldn't be expected to put in all-nighters meeting with people and yechidus and things that might frankly endanger him. So we gave him the bargain to have regular meetings with people on a limited, more abbreviated schedule, to answer correspondence as he did very diligently over the years. And we didn't tell Rebbetzin Schneerson all this because the Rebbetzin Schneerson was a very, very attentive wife who would have taken the whole matter very seriously and probably asked us to take the Rebbe out of a lot of his activities. This was a very difficult matter because I was in close contact with the Rebbetzin. She was a wonderful wife and a wonderful friend to the Rebbe, and they were really great partners together. And I didn't in any way want to make the Rebbetzin have to bodyguard the Rebbe too much. She was very, very careful to watch his diet. With the help of Rebbetzin Schneerson, the Rebbe was able to survive a very severe heart attack that required immense care and supervision in regard to sodium in the diet and other types of foods that could contribute to arteriosclerosis, because we recognized the Rebbe wasn't, capable of taking on another such attack, so everything had to be done to slow down the biological clock that might run against him if there weren't such care given. And the Rebbetzin Schneerson was just a wonderful partner of ours in helping us to establish some stability at home, to give him the proper diet that kept him out of heart failure and all the trouble that does befall people with this type of heart attack. And the rhythms got better and better with time, so thank God the Rebbe got stronger and stronger. I must confess that amongst the doctors, which the five of us who met regularly about the Rebbe, we at the beginning, especially around the time of Rosh Chodesh Kislev, the Yud Tes Kislev Farbrengen experience, we recognized that we couldn't expect for a miracle where the Rebbe would be performing at the level he did before the heart attack. We were just thankful that he could survive this and also go on and carry on his instruction to his following. But the Rebbe went much beyond that. He had a very optimistic spirit. We had a talk with the Rebbe about this, and the Rebbe asked us if we were optimists. And I confess that I am an optimist. Some of my colleagues confess that they're not as optimistic. And then he told me that his wife is not an optimist either. And he told those doctors, "You're in good company because my wife is also more cautious." But I told him that if we plan things correctly and let him show us that he could do this and that, we'll try to open up the world for him once again. And this is what happened, thank God. We were very blessed that beyond our expectation, not only did he open up his world for himself, he opened up the world for all of us. In promoting major programs, he opened up the idea of communicating his Farbrengens by satellite, by telecommunications, which were relatively new for the time. They were being used by the major network TVs, but the Rebbe had this type of equipment right at 770 to broadcast to the world. He also promoted the idea of expanding the program of the Shaluchim and extending their mission to all four corners of the world, not just most of the world. And it became a trademark of the Rebbe's contribution that over the years when he had regained his strength, he had 15 years to really develop the program of the Shaluchim, a very, very major legacy of his work. We also had many, many opportunities to get close with the Rebbe. And I once was asked to talk about this experience of being close with the Rebbe through the many visits we had to make each and every year. And I said that, in my experience with my Kala, when we were Chassan and Kala in our first year, we would take sometimes weekend trips up to the White Mountains from Boston. White Mountains are in New Hampshire. And we would be amazed at the beauty of the mountains. And as we looked at the landscape and the beauty of the mountains from the distance, it was just magnificent. What was even more magnificent when we got close to the mountains, they were difficult to scale, difficult to climb, and they were even more magnificent up close than they were from far away. And this is in contrast to our common experiences in meeting famous people. For all those who've had the privilege of meeting people in the know or in the news, that as you know them from a distance, they are quite magnificent. Their accomplishments are great. But as you get to know them personally and rub elbows and get to know a little bit more about their personal interests, quirks, or hobbies or habits, that you become a little discouraged that they're not too different from the other people in the world. They're kind of ordinary. Whereas in the case of the Rebbe, the more close we got to know the Rebbe, the more we recognized he was like our approach to the White Mountains. The closer we got to the Rebbe, the more deep and amazing he was, and there were no flaws found. He was really the type of person that as you got to know him, you didn't get disillusioned that he was quite ordinary. He was quite wonderful, quite a wonderful person. And it's hard to know this without having the repeated exposure that we were privileged to have. But all of us had this White Mountain approach, that as we approached the Rebbe, we recognized even greater was his grandeur, his inability to disappoint people or to fail people, his untired approach to trying to help and solve problems. And this was in the setting of a very, very extensive heart muscle loss when he had his heart attack. Normally people would retreat from their work, and he actually expanded his work. I would tell you that I was going to put in front of me a little model of a train that I like, a New York Central Commodore Vanderbilt train, because the Rebbe liked trains. In fact, I will tell you a little cute train story about it. When I was attending one of my earlier Farbrengens at Yud Shvat, it was a major snowstorm that blanked out the New York airports, and I recognized as I was leaving Chicago that the planes to New York were canceled. So I looked at all the possibilities and saw that the airport in Philadelphia was still flying planes in, although the snowstorm was descending to the south to reach Philadelphia. And I grabbed a plane to Philadelphia and then made a call to Rabbi Shem Tov, who lives there. And he met me at the airport, took me to the train station, and of course the trains were running irrespective of the snow. And I came up on the train right into downtown New York and took the subway to Crown Heights. And when I came to the Farbrengen, it is as if the Rebbe expected me to be there, because he came in and just showed me his watch that I was a little late for the Farbrengen. But he happened to love trains as I did, and he said the trains really saved your ability to make the trip, and I'm so happy to see you. And we had a very, very nice meeting after the Farbrengen where I did my usual thorough exam of the Rebbe's situation, and he was so appreciative, and he told me about his respect and love for trains. And my own love of little model trains was something the Rebbe took an interest in, as did the Rebbitzin. The Rebbe liked things that worked. He liked the way trains ran on schedule. He liked the way the trains were capable of going in all types of weather. And I think it reminded me very much of how the Rebbe could handle all kinds of weather. It would be reliable in delivering no matter what the weather, whether the climate was good and the people were with him or against him or for him or supportive. The Rebbe could navigate in all situations, just like the train could navigate in the snow when I came up to Yud Shvat Farbrengen. I would tell you also that like the reliability of the train was the reliability of Rebbitzin Schneerson, who at all times was the Rebbe's first and foremost helper. And without her support, the Rebbe was not quite at the same level of strength. When Rebbitzin passed away in the late 1980s, 88, it was a very big blow to the Rebbe, and very hard for all of us to see our Rebbe deeply saddened and troubled by his loss of his most wonderful support. I'll have to say, over the years I've had a wife on that level of support, and I could certainly now, as an older person, understand how dear was the Rebbitzin to the Rebbe. In closing, I just want to say that your Farbrengen, your convocation tonight, marks even another victory. The fact that years have gone by, the Rebbe's influence is not at all diminished. N'shei Chabad is convening and doing wonderful projects around the world, just as the Shluchim, whom the Rebbe motivated to go to all four corners of the world, are motivated to bring Lubavitch and Jewish spirit to every remote part of the world. And this legacy is something that we can't underestimate, because it's a direct honor to the Rebbe. It's a direct continuation of his work. And a group like N'shei Chabad brings to all families with whom they're in contact a taste of Lubavitch, a taste of Chabad, a connection with Judaism, for some people their only connection with Judaism, and an assured sign of the Rebbe's victory, starting with 33 years ago, at the time of Rosh Chodesh Kislev. I commend you all for your good work, and I hope that you'll have the continued spirit, you'll have learned from the spirit of the Rebbe just by watching his tapes, listening to his sichos, and studying about the Rebbe, and be as inspired as I have been over these years for one of the people who's been the strongest influence to me personally, like an extra father, a wonderful extra father. I hope you also have the same experience of sharing an extra father as I do. And my best wishes of Rosh Chodesh, happy Rosh Chodesh to all of you, and a very successful convention. Thank you.